All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're here, it's because you're interested in learning about our last branch of government, the judicial branch. And in order to finish my horrible sports analogy, I have a graphic for you. Thinking back to Article 1 on the legislative branch, remember, they are responsible for making the laws, similar to a coach making plays. This is supposed to be a coach. All right, followed by our executive branch. The executive branch, remember, is sort of like the players in that they carry out the laws. They carry out the plays. They're the ones that execute the plays. And then finally, to complete this beautiful cycle, is the judicial branch. The judicial branch is responsible for interpreting the laws, similar to how a referee interprets a game. So in total, this cycle, yes, make laws, execute laws or carry out laws, and interpret the laws. And so that's exactly what you're going to record at the top of your notes. The judicial branch is responsible for interpreting laws. Now, the business of the judicial branch happens here in the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about each of the elements of this court next. Okay, first thing you need to know, how long does a Supreme Court justice serve their term? You may already know this. They serve for life. The term length of a Supreme Court justice is life. Okay? All right, now, how do they get their jobs? Because they're pretty good jobs. There's 9 of them in total, and we'll talk about them in a second. But they are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. So the president, if there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court, meaning an opening on the Supreme Court, the president is responsible for selecting somebody, typically a notable judge who's in the federal court system. They nominate them, and then they are approved by the Senate. There are 9 total justices on the Supreme Court. Remember, they try to have odd numbers because they're going to vote on issues, and they want to make sure there's a clear winner. The Chief Justice, who is in charge of the Supreme Court, his name is John Roberts. Right here, this is the current makeup of the Supreme Court, and I know it's a little bit small on your screen, but you can just listen if you'd like to. Again, there have been 6 now, Republican-nominated justices, which means that a Republican president nominated them to the position. This includes John Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and most recently, this past fall, Amy Coney Barrett, following the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In addition, there are 3 Democratic justices, and these are at the bottom of your notes, by the way. Those 3 Democratic justices are Stephen Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor. Now, interesting tidbit. There have been a total of 5 female Supreme Court justices. That's it, throughout history. Most recently was Amy Coney Barrett, who was appointed to the bench this past fall. Okay. Now, what does the Supreme Court actually do? The Constitution gives them, just like every other branch, a list of jobs, things that they get to do. And the Supreme Court is told that they have jurisdiction, which means they have control over deciding cases that have to do with this list of elements. And the first thing that they have the power to interpret, going back to our branches, is the Constitution. That is what they spend the most amount of time doing. So in your notes, if you want to put a star, an asterisk, a smiley face, that first job is by far the most common job of the Supreme Court. Following that, we have federal laws, treaties, foreign ambassadors, naval and maritime laws, arguments between states, because if you think about it, who else is going to do that besides the Supreme Court? And then the last one is argument between U.S. citizens and other states or countries. So yes, there are Supreme Court cases with the United States versus whatever. Not criminal cases, so you don't see murder cases in the Supreme Court. They typically, again, spend the majority of their time interpreting the Constitution. Okay, now with that, there is a part of the Constitution that is what I call a superpower. And it's in this quote at the top of the page, and you can see it in your notes. Clause 1 says that in all the other cases, the Supreme Court shall have something called appellate jurisdiction. And this is something my students typically confuse, so I'm going to explain it in as simple terms as possible. This will take a second to write down. In other words, the Supreme Court has the right to revisit previous cases. You may want to pause the video and complete this box. Okay, I feel like Dora the Explorer. All right, revisit previous cases, as well as cases heard in lower courts or lesser courts, meaning that they can essentially, bear with me here, bring up cases from the dead. They can bring back old cases if they feel that the decision was unjust or unconstitutional. That's a big deal, because typically in a court of law, if a court decides something, that's it. End of the day, that is it. But the Supreme Court has this superpower to bring up old cases from the dead to revisit them. Now, this last component here is technically not in the Constitution, but it is another one of the superpowers of the Supreme Court. Okay, so bear with me here. This is a Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison. And it was a decision that was made very early in our country's founding that gave the Supreme Court one more power. Because truthfully, I don't think the Founding Fathers knew what the Supreme Court was actually going to do. So, the Supreme Court's additional job is to use something that's called judicial review to determine if laws are constitutional or not. Judicial review to determine if laws are constitutional or not. I promise I'm going to sum this all up in just a moment. Now, in summary, and wow, that's really dark, so I'm sorry about that. There are 3 superpowers of the Supreme Court. The first superpower, I would say, is life terms. Once you're in, you're in. And while that sounds a little bit archaic or old school, meaning that, in a democratic system, why don't they have terms? It's interesting because it means that once they're in office, they don't have to bother getting reelected. They can just make decisions on the basis of precedent and the Constitution. So I call it a superpower because in a lot of ways it means that they're untouchable. All right, so that's superpower number 1. Superpower number 2, appellate jurisdiction, meaning that they can bring back cases from the dead. Yes. All right, and so superpower number 3 is judicial review, that they can interpret laws and decide if they are constitutional or not. They get the last word. Once the Supreme Court makes that decision, no other branch of government can override it. And so when we watch the news and you constantly hear about Congress and obviously you constantly hear about the president, the Supreme Court has these really secret superpowers that people don't realize they have. Right? Okay. You'll notice that nowhere in this branch of government did we talk about checks and balances on the Supreme Court. They act pretty independently of the other branches of government. Congress doesn't come and check the work of the Supreme Court. The president does definitely not come and check the work of the Supreme Court. They act independently in many, many ways. Okay, last thing that the Supreme Court rules on is treason. It is the highest crime in the land, the most severe crime. There are 2 types of treason. Number 1 is levying war against the country. And number 2 is giving your enemies aid or comfort. So, for example, quite literally, the American Civil War is an example of that first type of treason, levying war against the United States of America. The second type of treason, which is a little more nuanced than that, is if an American is found guilty of helping an enemy. For example, back in the early or mid-1900s, the Rosenbergs were a couple that were found guilty of sharing secrets to communists. They were actually put to death for treason under this principle. So again, there are 2 types of treason that are also discussed within the Civil War. So with that, going back to the beginning, our Supreme Court is pretty impressive. It's impressive because of those superpowers, and it has some of the most long-lasting impacts on average people. All right, thank you.